In one weekend in end of January, we opened 1 million accounts in a weekend, which is incredible, right? I spent a lot of time on the interview process within Apex because you sort of live and die by the 800 and some odd people we have here. It's 2024 now, and the best we can do is still have to settle trades 24 hours later. Okay, it's good. It's better than what it was. It used to be T+5, by the way, but you're still talking about it's taking 24 hours to settle a pretty simple transaction in a world where technology is amazing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fintech Leaders, coming to you from New York City. I'm your host, Miguel Armaza, and I'm a co-founder of Gilgamesh Ventures, a venture capital fund that backs early-stage fintech entrepreneurs in the US, Canada, and Latin America. If you enjoyed this conversation, I invite you to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows so more people can learn about fintech leaders. Today, I sit down with Bill Capuzzi, CEO of Apex, a company that's built capital markets infrastructure to enable investing. The customers include major global banks, Webull, eToro, SoFi, and a long list of financial institutions with over $115 billion in AUM and over 21 million brokerage accounts. In 2023, the company reportedly had over $400 million in operating revenue, and they confidentially filed for a US IPO in December 2023. They are widely expected to go public this year in 2024. We discussed the rise of retail investing and democratizing access to public markets, what you should keep in mind when building and selling enterprise-grade software, bringing capital markets infrastructure to the 21st century, what he's learned since joining the board of DTCC, Bill's take on the movie Dumb Money, and a lot more. So Bill, welcome to Fintech Leaders. Thanks for joining me. I'm truly honored.
Miguel, thanks for having me on.
Bill, we're going to talk about your background and Apex and all that, but I want to get right to it and start with a question, of maybe a fun question, maybe not so fun. But did you watch the movie Dumb Money? And if so, what did you think of it?
Yeah, so I did see it. And what I can tell you is that I think they did a really good job of making it salacious and entertaining. You know, the reality of, let's go back to 2021, what was happening, right? So you had everyone sitting at home. You had PPP money from the government. You really had not a lot of sports that was going on. Lots of people had extra time on their hands. And oh, by the way, the markets were rocking and rolling, right? And, we'll get into Apex, but, the historical barriers to entry were significantly lowered, meaning people could log on, open an account, and start investing with $100. And we think about historically, the ability to do that was just not there. So you had, volatile markets, you had people that had a little bit of cash in their pockets, and you had people sitting at home, right? It was sort of the perfect storm. I think the parts that were salacious and entertaining was sort of this notion that there was this nefarious connecting the dots and people, and I can't speak to what was or wasn't happening at Robinhood, but this notion of Robinhood colluding to take down, the small investor, I can at least speak from the Apex perspective. Like, that part was fantastic, right? It was a fantastic story that, wasn't necessarily steeped in reality.
Yeah. And they didn't even get into what is the DTCC, right? Like, I'm with you. I enjoyed it. I'm not going to lie, but I didn't like how they portrayed the side of Robinhood and maybe even the hedge funds. But I mostly thought it was a bit unfair for Robinhood.
Well, and I'll tell you, part of it is and we'll get into why is Apex exist and what do we do? And it's really complicated stuff behind the scenes, right? And so trying to actually tell a story that's going to be entertaining, that people are actually going to pay to go in and watch a movie, and it be about sort of boring plumbing, DTCC and OCC and Apex behind the scenes and how trades are settled, that's boring stuff, right? It's complicated, but trying to entertain somebody in a movie and talking about those types of things probably don't go hand in hand.
It's not Hollywood. Yeah, I got to interview the CEO of Robinhood, Gretchen Howard, a week after that happened.
Oh my goodness.
It was fun. But Bill, let's switch gears a little bit. Tell us how you landed to Apex, because it's an interesting story. You were recruited because you came to them with a different offer.
Yeah. So, I think if you rewind a little bit further back, I started my career in finance. I actually started my working career as an environmental scientist, story for a different day, transitioned over into finance, and I started working in a firm called DLJ way back when. DLJ owned a company called Pershing, and was kind of my first introduction to the bowels, the plumbing of our industry. And what struck me was that, sort of think of it as sort of inchworm. The front of the inchworm was moving forward in terms of front office tools and cool apps and stuff. But the back of the inchworm, the plumbing, right, the custody, the DTCCs that we were talking about, was all old and COBOL code built in the 80s and really wasn't keeping kind of pace with the front of the inchworm. So I started my career at Pershing. It was really when I learned the guts and I learned, hey, there's a better way. I left Pershing, helped found my own company called ConvergeX, and Apex was for sale back in 2013. It was a public company called Penson. It ran into major issues, and a firm called Peak Six stepped in and bought the assets of Penson, called it Apex. Didn't really know what to do with a clearing firm. And I did, right? Having been at Pershing, for a number of years as a young man, I knew what was possible, right? I knew sort of what could be based upon my experience. And so I stepped in. I had some private equity folks around me, went to the folks at Peak Six and tried to acquire Apex. Now, now we're going on 8.5 years later. I was not successful in getting them to sell the company to me, but they were successful in convincing me to come over and help them run the company.
Why did you feel equipped to run Apex at that time?
Well, look, if I'm really honest, I still have it on my phone, Miguel. I sat down, I wrote out a T-chart, and I said, what are the positives? What are the negatives? And back to the point, it's like I was part of the pretty successful firm. It was in New York City. I live in New Jersey. This notion of stepping across, and at the time, Apex was based in Dallas, Texas. Doing a lot of traveling away from my young family at the time. It was scary. So I'll tell you, if I was really honest, it's like this was not a slam dunk. But the reality, like the gravitational pull was, I knew what was possible. I knew that the industry needed, let's go back to the inchworm. What it needed was someone to grab the back end and pull it forward. And what I saw within Apex was sort of the bones, the sort of the echoes, the skeleton of what could be, what, almost 9 years later has become today, which is pretty cool to have sat in the seat and been around amazing people to get from, 9 years ago to today.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly worked and is working. Your revenues are in the many hundreds of millions. That's not easy. Tell us about the big innovation of Apex. One side of it, I know this, is you work with this, and at least initially, the smaller companies. There are other large clearinghouses normally wouldn't touch because they were too small, right? I think serving the underserved companies is part of it, but there's more to it. Tell us about kind of like a little bit of the secret sauce.
Yeah. So look, the secret sauce, and the audience out there is a lot of founders, lots of folks that are running companies. We're a purpose-built company. And I'd say at a really high level, my first job is to be sort of chief cheerleader. And the drumbeat around waking up every day and having purpose. It's not about making money, right? Our purpose, if you ask any employee, right, 800 and some odd employees at Apex, if we had any of them on right now and you said, if Miguel asked, what's the purpose? They'd all say the same thing, which is to help every person on the planet invest in their future, right? And if you have that as a purpose and you sort of stick to that purpose, right, the rest sort of falls in line, right? And so you asked about sort of the innovations. There's dozens of them, right? And they all fall along that same line of how do you take the barriers to entry and lower them? And so probably the first and most important innovation of Apex was to make account opening simple. You still got to follow the rules. It, like I said before, it's really complicated business. You have the SEC, you have FINRA, you have a bunch of regulators that have very complicated rules. You have to make sure you dot I's and cross T's on actually following the rules, but do it in an incredibly seamless, efficient way, right? So I go back to early days of Apex. It was probably the most important thing we did, which was optimize account opening, right? And what that meant is the goal was to open an account in 5 seconds or less with no paperwork. And we accomplished that goal, right? And that was sort of the launching point for Apex. And then the series of things that happened and innovations that happened since then kind of followed suit.
You've had a front row seats to volumes and trends of the market for, especially the last decade. I know earlier than that. But this kind of came to a crescendo, if you will, in 2021. Take us through the rise of and what you were seeing, and also how has the market changed from your point of view in the last 2 years?
Yeah. So I talked before about the perfect storm, right? You had this environment where we did a good job. We lowered the barriers to entry. People could use their phones, open accounts, and they could trade and invest with very little amount of money. And people had extra cash because of what was happening in the markets and what was happening in the government, at least in the US. And so, I'll give you a good proof point. In one weekend, in end of January, we opened 1 million accounts in a weekend, which is incredible, right? The only way you can do that is to have the technology to be able to sort of support that at scale. And Apex had that sort of ability to do that. And so it was amazing, right? People were opening accounts and investing. What I would tell you is I think we did an amazing job as an industry in providing access, lowering the barriers to entry. What I would tell you is sitting in my seat, what I don't think we did a great job of is education, right? And so, go back to dumb money. It was easy to make money in 21 because everything was sort of up and to the right. I wouldn't say it was necessarily proper investing, right? And so a lot of what's happened since 21, there's been a lot of folks leaning in, whether it's because the SEC is sort of pushing on this or people just feel the desire, the need to really make sure that people understand how to properly invest. And so our part, just for what it's worth, we acquired a company in 21 called Zogo. I say we, the Peak Six, which is the parent company of Apex. And Zogo's entire focus is how to create financial literacy, right? And so part of the Apex, platform is, we today support 200 different clients, 200 plus clients. There's over 21 million end investors that we support. We have roughly 120 billion in assets across the platform. And, one of our goals obviously is to make sure the access is there. The second is through this platform called Zogo is to help ensure people are properly investing. The second part of your question was how have things changed? Okay, so the markets start to sell off. You get into 2022, people have to get back to work, right? We get back into this return to office. Sports comes back. Life sort of gets back to normal. And I think the most impactful thing as it relates to investing is that the market sold off in 22, right? So go back to what I said, which is, people could pick by and large any stock in 2020 or 2021 and make some money. 22, people saw that it wasn't as easy as they thought. And two big shifts happened. Number one was there was a very pronounced shift from active trading to passive investing, right? So people that were picking stock were now taking at least part of their portfolio and moving it into I'll call it robo, but something where it was much more of a passive sort of solution than them having to select individual securities. That was one. The second was the Fed started raising rates. And so there was a movement out of investing and into things like fixed income, right? Into things like high yield cash accounts. And again, Apex leaned in there. We'll just take the fixed income side and built a solution to fractionalize fixed income to allow, again, this younger, more tech savvy, smaller accounts to get access to what has typically been something for wealthy individuals.
I like that. So you've built products for all parts of the cycle, right? And that speaks to the strength of the business. Let's talk more about kind of your learnings as a leader of the company. You've said you're the cheerleader, and that's not just for your customers, but also your employees, I'm sure. Have you found an inspiration, a style that works for you or for managing highly productive teams?
It really starts with vision, purpose, right? We started talking about purpose-built company, and there's 800 some odd people here. The focus is really on how we changing the world, right? Now, we have an interesting angle here. We're a B2B company, right? And I talked about our purpose being helping every person on the planet invest, right? We do that through a B2B lens. And having clarity around that purpose, that vision as a company, I think is where things start. And then from there, you can get into, the strategy and then the tactics and the goals. Getting clear around that purpose and that consistent drumbeat about that, I think, is incredibly important. And then the second part is you got to hire great people, right? Tell them what to do at a high level and get out of their way and let them do their jobs. And that's tricky. It really is tricky because sometimes you need to course correct. But I think it's really important. I spend a lot of time on the interview process within Apex because you sort of live and die by the 800 and some odd people we have here. And I think we've done a really good job of setting course, that vision, hiring great people, tying them to that vision and letting them do their jobs.
The industry is, I think, not a secret that the infrastructure is in many ways tied to the past. And you've kind of alluded to this earlier in this interview. Can you recall some important engineering decisions that you guys had to make to actually build a modern stack?
Yeah. It's funny. You think about, the company's now 10 plus years old. We think about the decisions we make. Let's go back to the vision. We're here to support those 200 plus clients, and getting input from the clients is really important. What's happening on the front lines? Because it is a true partnership. But think about what we do, right? So the SoFi, Stash, Webull, eToro, they sit on top of Apex. They're the B2C side. Our job is to bring to life amazing things behind the scenes, right? Their job is to take that behind the scenes thing, we just talked about fractional fixed income, and provide a really cool solution to the end consumer. And what I tell you just on the tech front, I'll start with hiring great people. I'll go back to that, which is I have a long history of building technology, successful history. And I tell you, the best thing I ever did was hire great people. So our CTO, Andy Leintz, the former Google guy, Microsoft guy, just an amazing talent, great partner of mine. And we spend a lot of time kind of leaning into, okay, how are we going to continue to modernize the platform? How are we going to continue to sort of hear from our clients and build a roadmap that sort of lines up against our sort of broader strategy, but also taking obviously consideration what our clients' needs are in the short term.
I think related to this answer, a big chunk of the industry in fintech is building for other companies, right? And specifically, they are building infrastructure. We at Gilgamesh Ventures, we have invested in a number of these companies, and it's not easy. It's not easy, to break through. I mean, it's easier to start selling to fintechs, but once you start going to large financial institutions, there's a lot that comes into it. What have you learned about selling financial enterprise-grade products?
So I think one of the things is being sort of this premier provider of custody platform. We don't cut corners, Miguel. So, I talked before about how regulated this industry is, and there's really clear lines in our industry on what to do and what not to do, and Apex doesn't ever cross those lines. And when you think about evolving the company and you have that kind of vision we talked about, but you make sure that you do it the right way and that you follow the rules, that combination has proved to be incredibly successful, right? And so, today we support Goldman Sachs, we support JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, a number of really large institutions. And part of the reason we do is because they understand that not only do we have amazing technology, obviously we do things really cool, we disrupt, we do all the sexy stuff we talk about, but we do it through a platform that's 100% compliant with the rules and the regulations. And we have the capital base to be able to support the business, right? We're SOC 2 compliant. So you start connecting the dots between amazing technology, having the financial abilities, and dotting I's and crossing T's on the rules and regulations. That creates an incredibly deep moat around what Apex does. And so for the audience, back to that point is, it's tricky in the beginning, right? I go back to the early days of Apex. You're trying to win clients, but you should not win clients at the expense of following the rules, dotting I's and crossing T's and doing things the right way, because eventually it'll catch up to you.
I imagine you don't work with every company that wants to work with you. How do you handle, I guess we can call it counterparty risk, client risk?
It's tricky. So, think about risk. We're more than just a, sort of technology platform, right? We offer SaaS, but we also apply capital and are actually parties to the transaction. So let's go back to those days of the meme stock. In all that sort of dumb money conversation, go back to what happened to Robinhood, which was the regulatory capital required for them to settle the trades that they had on their platform was well in excess to what they actually had. That's real risk. And if not for the industry sort of allowing them to sort of work their way through that creates a massive systemic risk for our industry, those types of things. So I'll go back to what I said before is, you can do really sexy, very cool things like fractional fixed income. You could do things like open accounts in seconds, but you better make sure that you follow the rules and that you have a really robust risk management regime. And so there's an entire team at Apex that looks at risk from many different dimensions because, I think I got quoted and, I got interviewed by the House. And one of the things I said was, they asked me the question of like, will this happen again? What happened to meme stock? I was somewhat misquoted on what I said. But my answer was, yes, this will happen again. What I got misquoted was people took it as this nefarious thing, right? The collusion. what I really meant by it was that the fact that we've allowed more people to access the markets and the market conditions back in 21, it'll happen again. It may not look exactly like it looked in 21. And in the case of Apex, really proud because we had proper risk management in place to allow us to sort of navigate through that, in a really good way.
Yeah, it's a little bit like asking, will another bank suffer the same fate as SVB? And the technology tools that customers have allow for that situation to happen in the future, right? Sounds like you don't think there's too much democratizing. Like you want to get everyone access, but the caveat is, education needs to get better. I don't think that's only on the companies. That sounds like a systemic thing that needs to happen.
Yeah, look, so do I think there's too much? No. And so, I go back to our purpose, help every person on this planet invest in their future. You think about all the people out there that are not set up for when they hit 65 and want to retire, right? And so there's a lot of work for us to do to continue to help literally billions of people out there get ready for the next chapters of their lives. Now, with that said, to your point, you have to make sure that it's not just about handing picks and shovels to people, but actually giving them the tools, the instruction manuals for the picks and shovels to actually, properly invest. And I will say I'm proud of the fact that I think the industry saw that, recognized what did happen in 21, and has done a really good job of sort of catching up on the literacy side. We're not there yet. We still got plenty to do, but there's still, we're in a much better place. I also think for, the audience, there's still lots of opportunity around literacy for people to lean in and continue to make a difference.
And when you think of just the fintech market today, and it's a sliver of the market where Apex has been going at it and modernizing it, but let's just talk about capital markets tech. It's still huge, right? Are there any areas where you're excited about, where you see opportunity, any areas you're paying special attention to?
Yeah, so I'd say, think about Apex's path. We sort of dominate fintech. And I think the ability for us to take what we did for fintech and apply it to sort of the broader, I'll say, wealth management landscape, to me is a massive opportunity, right? And so what I mean by that is, all of the advisors out there, right? If you talk to sort of an advisor, in which I talk to a lot of them, the minimum account size at an average advisor is somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000, right? So think about that. You can't work with Miguel's advisory firm unless you can stroke a check and hand it to Miguel for $500,000. You think about how many people could actually write a check and hand it to somebody else for $500,000, right? It's really, you're talking about wealthy individuals. Why is that minimum $500,000, right? And so a place where we're leaning pretty hard in is how do we take what we did for the fintech world and apply it to sort of the traditional advisory world. And not surprising, there's lots of opportunity for us to disrupt on that side of retail.
Bill, you also joined, I think it was last year or maybe 2 years ago, the board of the DTCC. Most people don't know about what the DTCC does, but even less people are on the board. So what have you learned since joining? Maybe share a little bit about that.
Well, let's start with what is the DTCC, right? So effectively, my firm, let's say eToro, buys a security. There's a buyer on one side and there's a seller on the other side, right? And so it's, let's say it's Robinhood has a seller, eToro has a buyer. Okay, what happens in our industry is that there's a utility called DTCC, which kind of sits in between buyers and sellers and ensures settlement. What does that mean? What it means is that, God forbid, Robinhood goes out of business. In between the buying and the selling of that security, that there's guaranteed settlement so that whoever bought the security at eToro will get the security. And so they're effectively this great, this platform, this utility in our industry to make sure that all the buying and selling, both on a retail and institutional side, all actually happens, right? And that there's quote unquote guaranteed settlement. And so why did I want to join the board of DTCC? Because the best we could do, right? And so in a few months, the best we're going to do is to go from T+2 to T+1.
And that's been in the works for a while.
I started my career, I was on the original board in 1990 something when we were talking about going to T1. So this has been in the works for decades. So great, the industry's finally going to do this. But think about it, Miguel. It's 2024 now, and the best we can do is still have to settle trades 24 hours later. Okay, it's good. It's better than what it was. It used to be T+5, by the way. But you're still talking about it's taking 24 hours to settle a pretty simple transaction in a world where technology is amazing. And I'm not blaming DTCC because, frankly, it's largely the other participants, the big banks that sit around DTCC, which are the challenge. And so I joined the board really to kind of lean in and say, hey, let's keep going. Let's take the passion I have within Apex and apply it to the industry and say, hey, there's a better way. And I'll tell you, it's what I thought was going to be bureaucratic and slow. It's been an amazing experience for me because the rest of the board, the CEO of DTCC, are really pushing on how to continue to modernize our industry, obviously do it safely and securely, but really taking a leadership role on how to continue to advance, the markets from a sort of bottoms up perspective.
There's countries where settlement happens much quicker. Are you also looking internationally for inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, look, at DTCC, I think we are taking a leadership role across the world around going to T1. Like you said, there are some markets that are, say, T0, but there are a number of markets that are now following DTCC's lead. And I do believe DTCC will lead the charge to go to T0. And I think, we'll be the benchmark for the world, frankly, on how to get from here to there. On the Apex side, because we have, like I said, 21 plus million folks that use Apex, and they come from all over the world. It's not just a US product. Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because you're talking about people have money in different countries. So how do you get from Brazilian real into US dollars? How do you deal with different time zones? To your point, how do you settle trades in different markets? People underappreciate all that stuff behind the scenes that has to happen. That's where Apex comes in to sort of create normalcy and efficiency out of, I'll say, chaos.
Bill, before I let you go, two final questions. One, what has you excited for Apex for 24 and beyond?
Yeah, look, I keep coming back to purpose. Taking what we did for Fintech and applying it to the wealth space, I think is really exciting for me. And it's following that purpose, which is trying to help every person on the planet. The second part is continue to expand Apex overseas. So we opened Belfast office to support Europe a couple of years ago. Last month, we opened up the Philippines to support Asia. And so there's lots of work for us still to do outside of the US. And, I think 24 is going to be a really exciting year around both leaning into advisory and then also leaning into the international world.
And then finally, are there any books you'd recommend for people to read? I'm trying to get people to read more. I'm trying to get myself to read more.
I do read quite a bit. So my one go-to that I think I've read probably 4 times is a book called Essentialism. And it resonates for me, Miguel, because I'm not good at essentialism. right? And, the notion of the book is really around kind of focus on the most important things. And so it's a good grounding book for me around sort of staying focused on what's most important. I think the other one that I actually took off the shelf that I read at least once a year is a book called Multipliers, Liz Wiseman. And the notion of the book is how do you sort of create leaders within an organization that are going to sort of promulgate the vision, the purpose? How do you create these multipliers throughout the organization so that you continue to expand without having to turn into an army, right, of people? And so, and I think we do a really good job of this. So today, 800 people at Apex, and contrast that to somewhere like Pershing, which has 6,000 or 5,500 people. I think we're doing a good job of multiplying, right, creating multipliers across the organization to keep the number of people, sort of the right balance, and creating amazing leadership throughout the organization.
Well, to your point, software is supposed or was supposed to be exactly that, right? The great multiplier. It's deflationary in theory. Do you think the industry is doing a good job at that?
So look, I'll just speak from the investing side of our industry. I think we're just okay. Right? Which, honestly, Miguel, that's what creates opportunity for Apex, because we see that and we're sort of leaning into the inefficiencies that are still in our industry, right? The fact that it takes days to settle trades, the fact that open accounts and it still takes paperwork and days to do that, to transfer accounts takes multiple days. Like, all of those things are opportunities for us to make this world a better place. And so, the drumbeat within the firm is to continue sort of down this path of taking every piece of this kind of different parts of investing and trying to lower them to the point where, again, follow rules, right? Manage risk, but follow this path of creating hyper efficiency. I'm proud of it. Like, we've done a really good job. We got a long way to go, but I'm pretty proud of the path that we've been on over the last almost 10 years.
Well, Bill, really good stuff. Thanks for taking the time. I know it's a busy day as usual, but this has been really interesting to learn a bit more and look under the hood of Apex.
So much fun, Miguel. Thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this great episode with Bill Capuzzi, CEO of Apex. If you want more interviews, make sure to subscribe, follow, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. It helps and means a lot. And if you have any suggestions or thoughts about the show, just drop me a line on Twitter or LinkedIn. Signing off till next week, I'm your host, Miguel Armaza.